Hello and welcome to the Leathercraft Masterclass, and this review is going to be centered around something that works with tools but is not necessarily a tool in itself, and that is a cutting surface. Now, I've been looking for the correct cutting surface for quite some time. I haven't been truly happy with the green cutting mat that I've been using for probably about 2 or 3 years now. The issue with a cutting mat is it's great for pull cuts where you have a blade and you're pulling towards you, but anytime you need to make a push cut, for example one of these knives, a round knife, it tends to dig into the mat and makes it difficult to cut, especially for precision purposes. So I've been looking for something to replace the green cutting mat that's going to be better than the wooden surface that I work off as well, and I think that I found the perfect surface. Well, hopefully, because I bought one. But I'm going to be taking you through all the different types of plastics that I tried in searching for this particular one, and the parameters or the must-haves that I had in my list to make sure that I had the correct surface for my needs. Now, I approached a number of different manufacturers and got samples from all the different kinds of plastics that I had researched and thought might be useful for this purpose. But I had to make sure the manufacturers were able to make something that's big. If I got a sample and it was perfect, but they don't do it in the size that I want it, it was essentially useless for me. So I got a list of plastics that I could then purchase in sheet form, and the plastic samples that I purchased were polyethylene or low density polyethylene, high density polyethylene, UHMWPE, acetal, nylon, acrylic, polycarbonate, polypropylene and Teflon. Now, for some of those I had my reservations and some of them I had my high hopes, but what experience has taught me is that anytime you just focus on the theory of something, you don't always come up with the correct answer. Sometimes you need to actually practice what you're going to be using it for, and then you might find that the answer is a little bit different, and in my case it definitely was. Now, before I go through which one of those on the list that I chose, I'm going to go through another list, which is the list of parameters or must-haves for the cutting surface. So I needed all these things that I'll discuss next. Now, the first one is low friction coefficient. Basically, can a blade slide across it easily without too much friction? Now, one of the reasons that a low friction cutting surface is good is because you don't have to press as hard. Now, it's great for safety reasons, because if you're pressing really hard as you're cutting, you're more likely to slip and skip across the surface of the leather, which can be quite disastrous. But another thing is, accuracy lowers as pressure or effort increases. So if you want to precisely move your blade around and cut very, very intricate parts, the more pressure and effort that you have to put into your cutting, the lower the level of finesse, the lower level of accuracy that you're going to get. So having a lower level of friction is something that I was looking for at pretty much at the top of the list. The next thing I wanted is a surface which was resistant to glues. Now, one of the reasons that a cutting mat isn't my preferred choice is when cutting mats get dirty or they get covered in dried on glue, it tends to roll and edge very, very easily. So you may have had it before, even if you've snapped a fresh blade or you've sharpened your blade and you make your cut across, you might find towards the end sometimes there's still a few fibers hanging on. You have to cut it again 2 or 3 times, and then you look at the edge of your blade in the light and you can see it reflecting slightly. That's where a blade has a rolled edge, where it's rolled over. So it hasn't worn out, it's simply just rolled, and it's usually dirt and things that attach to adhesives, and the adhesives themselves are still on the surface. So I wanted something where I could easily get rid of the adhesives. They either peel off or they can scrape off easily. The next thing I'm looking for is improved edge retention. So for the same reasons that I didn't want glue to stick to it, edge retention is up there, because the more often that I have to stop and sharpen and re-hone my blades, I can end up losing flow in what I'm doing, and also it increases the amount of time that I'm not creating or crafting or doing whatever I need to be doing. So I needed a surface that was going to protect my edge and not roll an edge and keep it going so that I don't have to keep sharpening. Next on the list was something that is impervious or resistant to most solvents. Now, if you're anything like me, you use spirit dyes, you use acetone, you use different types of alcohols for general purpose, for cleaning, or whatever you need to be doing in your work, solvents are part of leathercraft in one way or another. So I needed a surface that wasn't going to be like general cutting mat, for example. Anytime you spill acetone on that, it ruins the surface. So I needed something that was going to be resistant. And the next thing is I want to be able to hammer or put some impact into the cutting surface itself. So it's no good to me if it deforms. So I want something that with a low level of deformity but is resistant to impact at the same time. So if I'm hammering my stitches and say for example I miss, something like that, and I hit the surface with the hammer, is it going to deform? Is it going to shatter? So that was something else. Next on the list is dye proof or dye resistant. So if I'm working with dyes, either water based or solvent based, I don't want to be marking the surface. Now you might have noticed this surface is in black. The reason is as you probably know, I make leathercraft video courses, and anytime you have a pure white surface, it plays havoc with the lighting on the camera. It tells you that the brightness is too high so that you have to lower it, but then my hands and things that I'm working on gets darker and darker and you lose detail. So for me, a darker surface is definitely better for creating videos. So you might not necessarily want to get something in black. These are usually available in white also. And lastly, warp resistant. So I wanted something that was dimensionally quite stable. So over time, I'm not going to have any warping or waving. So this particular sheet comes very, very flat and maintains that flatness regardless of how old it gets or how much it gets used. So I wanted something that was going to be completely flat against the table. So putting the list aside, what plastic came up top out of everything? And by far, it wasn't even close, acetal. And the particular type of acetal is acetal copolymer. Now there's two types of acetal. There is copolymer and homopolymer. Copolymer is what I have here. Homopolymer is very fractionally harder and it goes by the trade name Delrin, which is a DuPont product. So if you're looking for something that's even harder than this, then you can go for Delrin, but the downside is it's very, very expensive, very difficult to actually find, and the difference is probably going to be marginal. So acetal copolymer is the one I went for, and it is actually quite plentiful. The great thing about acetal is how hard it is. It's extremely hard for a plastic. It kind of bridges the gaps between plastic and metal essentially. It's used for gearing, it's used for bushings and bearings and things like that. It's even used on door hinges or anywhere where you need hardness, high strength, low friction and dimensional stability. So perfect for what we need. Now this sheet that I've purchased here is 610mm by 1 meter. It's kind of a standard size and you see it quite often, but essentially it's 1 meter long and it's about 61 centimeters deep. And I've gone for a thickness of 10 millimeters, so 10 mil. Now you can get it as low as about 6 millimeters I've seen, and that's going to be cheaper, but the downside is it's going to be a lot lighter as well. Now I wanted something that's a bit heavier. Now this, because of its density, is very heavy. It weighs about 9 or 10 kilograms. So even though it is generally quite a slippery surface or low friction surface, it actually sticks to the table quite well, so I don't have to screw it down on the edges or nail it down or whatever you need to do to keep it still, and I can actually lift it up and move it if I need to for whatever reason. So I'd probably recommend 10 to 12 millimeters, but if budgets constrain your purchases, then I would probably go for a 6 mil. You're still going to get the same benefits, and then after a few years, when you've ruined one side, switch it over and you can go on the other side and carry on. But 10 millimeters just has that a bit more solidity to it, and it's going to be very good for hammering down and be quite stable during that process. So let's grab some leather. Just a couple little samples here, and the round knife. Now this is really where acetal shines, because it's low level of friction, but also because it's so hard, and I'll give you a demonstration of how hard it is later. Because it's so hard, the blade doesn't dig in very far into the surface, which means it can skip along without any problems. The strange thing about this is it's ridiculous for maintaining an edge. It's by far the best plastic, the best surface I've ever used for maintaining an edge. It doesn't seem to roll it, even though it's very hard, and it just keeps going. Even on a cheaper snap-off blade, it lasts way longer. I'd say anywhere between 6 and 10 times longer than I would normally get from using a generic self-healing cutting mat. So let's take this blade, and it just glides through so easily. I mean, this knife is obviously sharp, but there's just very, very little effort. The strangest thing that I've had to kind of retrain myself in using this surface is I don't need to press down as hard as I used to in order to get the same cut. So I can use a lot lighter pressure, hardly any pressure at all, and it still cuts just as good. There's no friction pulling it or preventing it from pushing forward, should I say. Very, very little friction. And you know, I could virtually just keep doing this all day. I mean, it's high-speed steel that I'm working with here, so it's a good steel, but it just doesn't seem to dull it. It's so good. And because it doesn't dig in very far, it's not so much of a problem if I need to abruptly turn it. Now, some softer plastics where the tip digs into the surface, if you turn it too abruptly, especially with the harder steels like a Japanese cutting knife, you can very easily snap a corner off. But this doesn't seem to be so much of a problem. Now, another thing is, it's not self-healing. So right now I can see some very, very faint lines in there, but it doesn't really stick out enough where if I were to, I don't know, hammer down a project over that, I wouldn't get lines in there like I would with nylon or high density polyethylene, for example. And if you do, okay, so if you really give it the beans and you create a little bit of a groove in there, grab a glass slicker, in this case just a simple tile, which is a glass tile, and you just go, and that's done, and you can't even feel it anymore. It's gone. So there's, you know, it really doesn't need to be self-healing because it doesn't raise up very much because it's so hard, but if it does, just rub a piece of glass, even a polished hammer or something, over the surface, and that's it, sorted. Now moving on to pull cut. Again, you know, this is a fresh blade on here, but it's just simply a snap-off blade. It's nothing special, it's no super steel. I mean, this is not a great example, it's just some 2mm veg tan. It cuts through everything so easily with such little friction. That's the strange thing about it. On a rotary cutter, again, it doesn't affect the blade, it doesn't roll the edge, it just cuts through as it should do. And anytime you see some ridges, actually it's given a bit more of a ridge on the pull cut, you just go over there and it's gone. That's it. I mean, you can visually see some marks in it, and that's about it. Now, while I'm here, I will tell you about another one, and that is UHMWPE. Now this stuff is absolutely fantastic. This is one of the pieces that I got to test it out. I was testing it out on this side. I don't know if you can see some marks on there, but this is great for gluing. Okay, so this, in fact, I've put some PVA glue on the surface here. Don't know if you can see, I'll just move the camera very slightly. So this is PVA, and even this is just a glue applicator. I can very easily just remove it from the surface. It doesn't stick to it very much. But this UHMWPE is fantastic for gluing on. So solvent-based contact adhesives, PVA, water-based contact adhesives, nothing sticks to this at all. Even using a 2-part epoxy, you can mix it up on here, and then when you're done, you can just bend it and peel it off and it comes off like nothing. So this is fantastic for gluing up. But when it comes to, even though it's a lower friction than acetal, it digs in and bites into the surface too easily, so it's not hard enough. So even though it's ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, it doesn't have enough density to resist a blade going into it. But it's fantastic if you get a sheet. This is just an A4 size for gluing up. You could just peel it off straight away afterwards. It's really good. Now here's an offcut of acetal, which is what this cutting surface is made of. Now this is just me cutting a piece so that I could see how it machines, how it cuts. And if I take the back of this sheet, I can show you, it literally digs in as if I was using metal. I don't know if you can see that in there. It deforms the surface. That's how hard this is compared to most plastics. But strangely, it is really delicate on the edge of a blade. So that is my recommendation. That's from my findings. Of course, your mileage may vary. You might have different needs to me. But out of all the plastics that I tried, this surface is by far the most superior surface. And the cost, it cost me delivered £78. So for 1 meter by 610, £78 delivered to my door within 2 days, I think it was. And I'll be putting those links in. If you're watching this on YouTube, the links will be in the usual place. If you're watching this on IGTV, click the little information tab where it will pop up, and I'll put the links in so you can go and click there. But essentially, yeah, £78 is not going to be that much different in euros and dollars at the moment, so the pound's not particularly strong. But I think, you know, I was prepared to pay a lot more, and I was surprised at how little money this stuff actually is. And yes, it can stand up to pricking irons. So if I take the 4Z iron, which is probably one of the sharpest teeth on the market at the moment, if I smack that through there, it leaves a very slight mark on the other side, even though it penetrates all the way through. Being so sharp, you don't really need to hit it that hard, to be honest. But again, any tiny little marks, when you're finished using your pricking iron, just get your little piece of glass sheet and go over it. Or even the surface of a hammer, for example. That just gets rid of it and just pushes it back down, so you can't feel anything on there at the moment. Whether or not it's hard enough to chip any teeth on here, any of the prongs, for example, or snap any of them, I would be very wary of going in at an angle. Don't know why you would, but anytime that I've used it over the past few days, I feel quite confident about going through. And when you do hit the acetal, there is some definite feedback there, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend everybody does that. If you're comfortable doing it, you can, and it doesn't really affect the acetal sheet much. It goes in very, very slight amount, but nothing compared to nylon or polyethylene or anything like that. And by the way, I have a new link for these, so if anybody wants to purchase these irons, these are the replaceable teeth 4Z irons, which actually reverse. So one iron for reverse or obverse, so if you're box stitching or matching up gussets to bags and things like that, then these are actually quite handy to have. Very, very high quality. So I've put a link in there as well. So thank you for watching this quick review. My recommendations would be, if you're not 100% sure about buying this, you can always buy samples just to test it out. But for me, I find this the best cutting surface by a long margin. So don't forget to like, subscribe and follow me for more reviews. And if you like this, feel free to leave a comment below and let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video.